The people of ancient Palestine, the land of the Bible, lived mostly in cities or towns. The Jerusalem of today gives us a good clue as to what cities of biblical times might have looked like. They were surrounded by immense stone walls and could be entered only through massive, well-guarded gates. Towns were smaller than cities and were without the benefit of great walls to protect them against enemy attack. Bethlehem, the birthplace of our Savior, is a good example of such. Other towns often were no more than a small group of houses and mud huts. Many of them can still be seen today. There was yet another type of living place, the tent, called the House of Hair, which was home to the wandering nomadic people. In the land of the Bible today, much of the life and customs followed by the dwellers of cities, towns, and houses of hair has remained practically unchanged since biblical times. The love of bright clothing seems to be a characteristic of people who live in a drab background, and the people of the Bible lands are no exception. Throughout the centuries, each town has retained its own particular style, and possibly no other is more beautiful than that worn by the women of Ramallah. In other towns, too, such colorful garments are a common sight at the well, for it has always been the meeting place for women. Here they go about their important daily chore of providing water for their families. Of all the natural resources in the land of the Bible, none has ever been more precious than water, simply because it is so scarce. The biblical farmer, returning home from his fields, witnessed a scene much like this one. His womenfolk preparing vegetables for the evening meal, chatting, possibly talking over the news they heard that afternoon at the well. Beans, lentils, cucumbers, squash, peas, lettuce, onions. All were grown in the biblical garden and are still being raised today. Man in Palestine has been farming and cultivating his land for almost 10,000 years. During the spring months, the reaping of the grain begins. The farmer grabs a handful of grain, then cuts it with a sickle, an implement so ancient it dates back to prehistoric times. Once the grain is cut, it must be taken to the threshing floor, and most of the time, camels are used for the carrying. At times, the loads they bear are so great, they present the comical appearance of huge bundles of grain walking about on legs. The threshing floor is usually a large, level area where the ground is quite hard. The threshing board is generally about 4 feet long, and on the underside, sharp stones are embedded in the wood. It is the action of the board, along with the feet of the animals, that loosens the kernels. Around and around they go. In biblical times, children considered it great fun to ride the board, and thousands of years later, children of the Bible land still enjoy it. Standing on the sidelines is a substitute waiting to get into action, and a spectator, a little too young to join in the fun. After the boys and the donkeys are finished, the farmer begins winnowing the grain. As he tosses bunches into the air, the breeze blows away the straw or chaff, letting the heavier kernels of grain fall back to the floor. Later on, it is swept up and put into baskets. From either wheat or barley, bread is made, and there are several favorite ways of baking it. With one, the dough is placed on hot stones in a small oven. But the nomad women prepare it in another manner. Bread has always been a basic necessity for human existence in the Bible lands, and Christ used it as a symbol when he emphasized our need for bread for the soul as well as bread for the body. Perhaps nothing has changed so little as the life led by the nomad. It remains much as it was during the days of the patriarchs. Tents woven from goat's hair, very similar to those we see today, were made by Paul, for tent making was his profession. The nomad is continually on the move, leading his flocks in a never-ending search for grazing lands and water.